They killing people out here, boy. Time to speak peace. Yeah. Nobody trusts a soul in this game but they self. They know how it goes, keep that flame on they belt. Everybody on it dangerous, yeah. Everybody on it dangerous, yeah. That way that you know, I told you through them that this is gonna be a good interview, so you can take a little bit more time with them.
All right, so
but five. But listen, even at the block party though, like the interview should be real short because I just want you catching a whole bunch of people. And the main thing you're gonna be asking is just like what is Block Hustle? How did you meet EI? What did you think about him? What you think about him now? You know how you see him grinding in the ministry and all that.
Okay.
So you good to go?
Yeah.
All right, Thea, I'm sorry for this, but this is for the shot.
I hope you know I zoomed in and all for that. I got that one, yeah.
Hey, you already knew that would have been cool, like with not even like having to explain myself. And I really wasn't even thinking about like what she's thinking. But it's funny, that's love though on your end.
I had to explain
myself.
I just want to
be like, he ain't
just
crazy.
So you know.
He kind of crazy. He ain't that crazy. Like
this is part of the film project.
Okay. I respect it.
All right, so Stephen Lawrence Testa, that's me. That's who I am. July 23rd, 1990, I was born in Houston, Texas at Houston Memorial. But that's not where the journey began. I mean, obviously that's where the journey began for me, but the backdrop of the story. My mother and my father, they're both from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I think my mom and my father were like high school sweethearts. They were dating at the end of the high school years, and they got married in Pennsylvania, and they both wanted to just like move out the state and start somewhere new. So they chose Texas and they moved to Houston. But neither of them really had the best, upbringing in childhood, especially my father. My father, I believe he is like one out of, I think maybe 6 siblings, and I believe he's like in the middle. So from what I hear from people with bigger families, especially being like a middle child, you can be caught up just in like everybody else's, drama and everybody else's life. So yeah, that's how it can be for like a middle child, kind of being lost in the mix. But that's nothing, in compared to what was really going on. His father, my dad's father, was an extreme alcoholic, and not only was he drunk 24/7, but he used to beat the brakes off of his wife, which is my dad's mother, and all of my dad's siblings, all of his brothers and sisters, including my dad. And I remember my dad like sharing stories with me when I was a kid about like his childhood memories and how like he really doesn't have too many, and the ones that he has are obviously not good. And just how his dad would just randomly come home and just beat up his mom and start ripping him and all his brothers and sisters who were in the house at the time, just outside, and just like it'd be pouring down rain, and he's just beating them back black and blue with the belt, in the face and everything, and just tearing up the home. And that was just, a consistent reality for him. And, his fantasy as a child was growing up, to where he could handle his own and killing his own father. But his father died. My grandfather died when my dad, I think, was 9 years old. I think he died of some type of cancer, some type of health issue. I don't know if it was liver cancer, lung cancer, what. I think it might have been liver cancer. But not only that, but then my dad's mother, my grandmother, she got sick with cancer, I think when he was 13. And then she died. So, my father lost both of his parents as a child. And like as the middle child, his older siblings had already, moved out the house and moved on with their lives. Are you good? Remember, girl, we're editing everything.
Okay, and keep your head up because I want you to be. There you go. Don't let me move your head.
It's okay for you to interrupt and be like, lift your head up.
Yeah, say whatever.
Yeah, it makes it authentic, so it's cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so because we can always edit whatever, and also too, just do you. So you can just imagine that for him, losing both parents, as a child, but being the oldest kid of all of his younger brothers and sisters in the house, he was left the responsibility to not only fend for himself, but take care of his brothers and sisters. So that was, when he, I think, was a freshman in high school, maybe in 8th grade. So he started working real young. and not only providing for him, but his, brothers and sisters, I think, with barely any help from any outside family. So my dad had a jacked up childhood and messed up upbringing, and that left him with many, psychological scars and issues. From what I hear from him and from other people, he was like a loner, growing up, real isolated, real quiet, and really didn't mess with too many people. But on the other hand, my mom was the exact opposite. Not only is like I'm just like my mama when it comes to personality. She's a communicator. She's goofy. She's crazy. She's funny, and she's just very bubbly, and she's always like in high spirits. And so that's just my mom. But her childhood wasn't the best either, even though her living situation was different. She had a mother and a father, my grandfather and my grandmother. And even though my grandfather was a solid, hardworking, dude who worked in a steel factory for I think his whole life in Pittsburgh, who eventually went deaf because of like being around all the machinery. My grandmother, which is my mother's mother, she was very stern, strict, and kind of like cold. I think I remember my mom telling me whenever my grandmother died, when her mom died, that she didn't hear "I love you" once from her mother, I think her entire life. And I remember my mom like even told me that with tears in her eyes. And obviously, that's not like the most tragic thing that kids can experience, but just feeling neglected and not loved by her mother really affected my mom. And especially because my grandmother, her mom, would show affection and would show like a nurturing side to like her other siblings. Like she got a sister and a brother, and she would somewhat show them more affection than my mom. So she always felt like kind of left out because of that. So I say all that to say they both wanted to get away from their upbringing. They wanted to get away from the memories that they had. They wanted to get away from Pennsylvania. So they moved to Houston. And when they moved to Houston after they got married, they had my sister. My sister was born. She's 3 years older than me. And then my mother got pregnant again. I think it was a year later, and she had a miscarriage. And then she got pregnant with me, I think maybe the next year or 2 years after. So it had to have been the next year. So I was born in 1990 in Houston, Texas. And at this time, I only know this because, my mother communicating it to me. My father started, showing some severe signs of like extreme clinical depression. And nobody knew what was going on at this time. My mother didn't know, my father didn't know. Like I said, he always been very isolated into himself just because of his childhood and the trauma that he went through. But I think all that stuff started manifesting as a young adult. He was terrible with his money managing. He started his own his own landscaping company, his own lawn company, and he went bankrupt. And he was just taking everything out on my mom, everything that he was feeling internally, all his anger, all his pride, all his pain, all his hurt. He was just outleashing on my mom, just being verbally abusive and just cold. And I think that affected my mom because of her upbringing, being rejected by her mother. I think her feeling that from her own husband was like even a worse or sore. So he was being very aggressive, not physically, but I think just in his demeanor and his conversation, just being very resentful and hateful to her, to where she felt hated in the home and she didn't feel safe, she didn't feel comfortable. And I remember her telling me that she knew it was time to leave because this is all day, every day, and this went on for a while. That I think he snapped. I was only probably 3 at the time, and he snapped on me. I don't remember this, but apparently he just went to the next level. And she said for the first time she felt scared, not just so much for herself but for me. And so that's whenever she decided that it was time to leave him, and she took me and my sister from Houston over here to Florida to live with her parents, to live with my grandmother and grandfather. And I think that's one of my first childhood memories. I got a couple memories. In the home in Houston. But I think one of the most vivid memories is whenever my mother was leaving my dad. And I didn't know what was going on at the time, but I just remember as a kid, my aunt being there, my sister, I was 3, so she was 6. My aunt was there, and my grandmother, and my mom. And I remember us just like putting everything in the car. They were packing everything in the trunk. And I remember everyone was crying, and I didn't know why they was crying. So I remember I was crying too. And I remember we was all getting in the car, like we all made one move to the car with all this stuff. And all the women are crying, and I'm crying because they're crying. And I just remember sitting in the back seat, you know, like in my little baby seat or whatever, and my dad coming up to the car. And he used to always do this thing where he would put his weight on the car and, you know, make the car go up and down. And I remember he was crying. So, you know, I still didn't register. I didn't know what was going on. But I remember that was when we left Houston. So that was always been like a vivid memory of like one of the most predominant memories of my childhood, like my first memories. So, you know, that's when we left Houston, we moved to Florida. And I think we started living with my grandma first for like a month. And she was staying at like some condo. It was my grandma, my grandfather, my mother, me, and my sister. But then we got like a tiny little duplex in South Venice. That's where we moved to, Venice, Florida. And it was real run down and crappy. But as a kid, obviously, I don't know no better. I was fine. I was used to like whatever, how we was living. But my mama was a go-getter, man. She's always been a hustler. She was working for like GTE and Altel forever and like jewelry stores, always in sales. She's a communicator. She was always in sales. So I remember like going from apartment to apartment as a kid, moving into like the Falls of Venice. We stayed there for a couple of years. I think we stayed at my grandmother's for a couple of years. So that's pretty much like my childhood, like my young adolescence. And like, I didn't have a terrible upbringing whatsoever. You know what I mean? Like my grandmother was very strict, but she was just disciplining me. My grandfather, like he was probably the only father figure I had in my life predominantly. And I was too young really to like learn or glean anything from him. And he was too old, and he was like deaf in both ears. He had hearing aids. So I just remember him saying like, "Hey, come here," and just like telling me to. One of my memories of him besides fishing, I remember one day. It's funny, my grandma used to cook dinner same time every day at 5:00. And when we would come home from school, I would walk back. And my grandfather used to pick us up at the corner. It's when I'm real young, maybe like 6, 7. He used to meet us at the corner in front of the school, and we would walk back to their apartment. And I remember my grandfather took a nap every day at 5. Like he'd fall asleep at like 4:30, 4:45. But we eat every day at 5:00. That never changes. It's clockwork. So every day, like Monday through Friday, you know, I think that's when we was there, or maybe when we was living there, I forget. My grandma would send me to go wake up my grandfather. So when I used to hate waking him up because I would get the backlash, you know. So I'd just go tap him and run, or just like yell from a distance. You know, I used to hate waking him up because he'd be pissed, you know, because he's so big. He was the biggest. He's the only male figure in my life, and he's real big. He's like 6'1", not that big, but I was a kid, so everybody in my family's short. So to me, he's like a giant. So I'd tap him or yell and run, whatever, and he's always yelling at me for waking him up. But I remember him always snapping on my grandmother. He'd be like, "Woman, why you always serve dinner when I'm asleep?" She used to always be like, "You literally take a nap at the same time every day. You know we eat dinner 5:00 every day." Oh, anyways, I always remember that story. It was funny. But I do remember one memory one day. I think I was like 9. My grandfather used to do 4 things, my bad. He used to be obsessed with fishing. My grandfather always fished. He always watched 60 Minutes every day. He always watched women tennis. He would watch sports too. But I remember one day he was watching 60 Minutes, and he said, "Steven, come here." He said, "Sit down, watch this." And he was a man of few words, man. I literally only remember him speaking to me like a couple sentences, and I'm sure he said more to me, but I don't remember any. This is one of them. It's a 60-minute special of like an 18-year-old kid doing life in prison. And it's crazy because after I watched it, I'm like, okay, why am I watching this? I look up at him, he goes, "You see that kid?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "He cries himself to sleep every night doing life in prison." I'm like, "All right." And he's like, "Don't let that be you." And that was it. And I'm like, dang. And it's funny because I remember that like my whole life. And I remember like growing up in prison and then out of incarceration. I was a 9-year-old kid. I wasn't like a bad kid. I was pretty good. But I look back now, I'm like, dang, I wonder if like he foresaw something, or if that was like God like speaking through him. Probably not. Just maybe his approach of like some type of father figure as my grandfather. Yeah, but then I also remember him too, like, you know, as a grown up with an absentee father, my dad not being there, you know, you don't have a male role model in your life teaching you how to be a man. And obviously he knew that my dad wasn't involved in my life, so I think that he tried to do that the best that he could and not really communicating. He'd take me fishing with him, so I fell in love with fishing as a kid because of him. And I remember going out to the pier with him. Man, he was like a legend at the Venice Pier. We'd go out to Sharky's, and I just remember everybody saying his name. Everyone knew him. Hey, Lawrence, hey, Lawrence, hey, Lawrence. And he wouldn't even talk to them. He just walked past them, you know, because he didn't talk to anybody. And I just remember like he was a legend. He had his own spot down there at the bottom of the pier. Like, no, like, you know, the very back of the pier was for like the VIPs. You know, they had a little like, you know, rope up to where people couldn't go back there. Everyone had their own like assigned spot. So he taught me how to fish, and I used to really, I think, enjoy being with him and really seeing like men gravitate towards him because he was like a man's man. So I think that was like impactful for me as a kid. Because he was like the only male role model I had. But I remember him telling me one time, there's another conversation I remember him, he taught me how to shake a hand and how to make sure like he like made sure like, now you look a man in his eyes, all right, you know, gave me the whole speech and, you know, the firm grip, and it was only like 2 seconds. But I remember like that was impactful for me because I literally had like none of those conversations ever. So I remember those small conversations that I had like in life. And my grandfather was pretty much all of them. So he died, I think, when I was 9. No. He died when I was 12. So we lived there for a couple years, and then my mother started dating this guy, Bill. Bill was an ex-military vet from the Army. So they started dating. And I remember my mom started dating, like, she didn't date right away when she divorced my father. I think it was a couple years. It's because she left my father when I was 3. I would assume maybe she started dating whenever I was like 7, 8, maybe. Or maybe that's when I remember like meeting them, or maybe the only serious ones that I would meet. Because I remember like a couple dudes she like would take to the house and I'd meet them. And I remember like as a kid, the first thing I would do was like run and jump on them and like climb up on them and like try to wrestle them. And it's funny too because like, you know, some kids like they don't trust nobody, you know, or especially with their mom, they don't want no other guy talking to their mom or whatever. But I don't think that was the case for me at all. I would think I was extremely excited that my mom had a boyfriend, just because like that meant there was another guy around. You know what I mean? That there would be like a father figure in my life. So I remember just loving all, like, I think she only brought back like 2 different boyfriends before she remarried on different occasions. And I remember I liked them both, and I was just excited that, you know, there was a dude around. So, but anyways, so the 2 relationships didn't last long, but then she started dating this other guy, the military vet, and then they remarried, which my mother got remarried, so they got married. And then he had some money because he had his pension from the Army. I think he was like in the Army like over 25 years, I think. And he was a man's man, very macho, he was very funny, you know, real goofy, but he was kind of aggressive too. So I think that really like, you know, made me like look up to him even more just because he was like a man's man. And so they were married for 2 years. He got a house built. We moved into one house in Venice Acres in Venice. We lived there for a couple years. But then they also got a house built. They built a house down there in South Venice on Nantucket. And actually, you know, we got some footage of that when we went down there the other day. But I remember a story of being in the home, the first home that we moved into, the first house. This is like the first time I experienced like family. You know, my mother remarried, and she married this guy, you know, who was ex-military. And we got like a nice house. Like, we never had a house before. I mean, obviously in Houston, but that's when like I was 3. I didn't remember that. That was with my dad and my mom. So now after a couple of years, my mom remarried, and we moved into this nice like 3-bedroom house, and it's pretty big, like in this nice neighborhood in Venice. And it had, you know, a big yard in the back, and he had a dog. So I used to love playing with the dog. He used to always go out back and, you know, play football and play baseball. And there's kids down the street I used to always play sports with. And you know, I remember there was that family down the street. They were called the Carpenters. And I knew that they was Christians. And the only reason why I knew that they were Christian is because they couldn't come out Only reason why I knew they were Christian because they couldn't come out and play on Sundays. And these kids were like the kids in the neighborhood, obviously like every other kid. They were out all day, every single day. And we were always playing sports, basketball, football, kickball, everything. And Sundays is obviously, the weekend, so everybody's looking forward to Sunday too to play. But everybody knows the Carpenters ain't finna be out there. It was 3 brothers, I think, and 3 sisters. So none of them would be out there playing. And I knew it's because they were Christian and something about they don't play on Sundays. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know why. I just thought that was weird. But I remember one day they invited me to go to church. And my grandmother, she wasn't a Christian, I would say, like devout. She was Catholic, but she really wasn't even like devout per se. She grew up in, going to Catholic Mass, so she knew all the prayers. And as a kid, moving from Houston to Florida and being in her home, she would make me pray before every meal. She made me pray before I go to sleep at night. So I knew some of like the Hail Marys and the other Catholic prayers and stuff. And I was even forced to go to like a Catholic preschool. Well, not forced, I really didn't care. I just, they made me go to a Catholic preschool whenever I was like, 6. But like, even though that introduced me to the gospel and I began to learn about Jesus, it wasn't a good experience for me because I just remember being terrified in Catholic Mass. Like, I was like spooked, like all these people in robes and singing these weird songs and all the music and these old people. It was just creepy for me. And just, I even remember like in the Catholic school, like at the preschool, like they always talked about like the devil and they had these pictures, you know what I mean? So even Jesus kind of spooked me out. I didn't look to like Jesus as like some hero or savior. I was just kind of weirded out entirely by the whole Christian, whole Christian vibe. And I really didn't know how to take it. But yeah, when I was 9, the Carpenters invited me to go to a church outreach event at their church. And I only wanted to go because it was like this big, outreach event, and they were all like, bodybuilders. I think they were called the A-Team. And what they would do is like they would, rip apart phone books, and they would bend steel, and they would, punch through cinder blocks, and they would handcuff themselves and rip themselves out the handcuffs and just do all these different like strength training, little exercises. And while they would do it, they would, quote scripture and share the testimonies and talk about the gospel. And I remember like nothing was really impactful during the service. I just thought it was dope, all the cool things that they was breaking. But I remember at the very end, they presented the gospel and they had the altar call. And they had everyone close their eyes. And as they explained the gospel, they said, if you were to die tonight, and if you don't know if you would go to heaven, raise your hand. And I'm a 9-year-old kid, so I'm kind of spooked now. Like, I don't know where I'm finna go if I die. So I remember raising my hand, and they had us all come in the back. And whenever they took us all in the back, they explained the gospel to us again, and they led us in the sinner's prayer. And we prayed, and they told us that we was Christians now, and welcome to the family of God. And they gave us, Bibles, and I was kind of excited. I thought it was pretty dope. And that's when I knew God he was obviously always drawing me throughout, my life. I can look back and see it now. I didn't realize then. But I think that's when I began to be more aware of just God and moving in my life and just drawing me to himself. So I remember even going back and telling my mom and being excited, like showing her the Bible and telling her I wanted to go back, but I never did. But I remember being interested because like my mother was never, religious whatsoever. And even though my grandmother, was kind of like ritualistic with Catholicism, like it wasn't like devout. She wouldn't like talk about God or talk to me about the Bible or read me the Bible or anything like that. It was just all ritual for her. So yeah. But for me growing up, man, I was an athlete. I was always a goofball. I was always really creative. I've always been interested in music. And I think that was just natural for me and just part of God's giftedness. I remember riding around in the car with my mom and my sister, and I'd be in the back seat, and whatever pop song or alternative rock or whatever's on the station, I remember always singing over it and making up my own lyrics. That was real like goofy and cheesy and funny, and I used to always have my mom and my sister cracking up, dying laughing. A lot of times I'm sure I just annoy them and they tell me to shut up. But I remember I was good at it because I used to always say like funny things and it would rhyme, and I always would have them like literally crying, laughing. So I think that was like at a young age, I began to identify like my artistic ability and God's giftedness upon my life for music. And especially because my sister started playing the guitar at a young age and the flute. I think she started playing the flute first because of band in middle school. And her interest in the flute had me interested in music. And I think because she played the flute, I wanted to play the flute too. But I'm glad I never did because that would have been pretty, no offense to any flute players out there. But I'm glad it didn't, happen.
It's gonna cut. It's gonna cut.
We need the fan base. Yeah.
We got a whole
fan base.
We play the flute.
All these gangsters like flute players too.
Yeah, I'm from Third Ward. I play the flute. Let me quit. I'm rolling. It's funny because it's like you were sneaking and doing it, and I was confused at first. So I'm like,
yeah, we gonna have some of the best bloopers, bro.
About 50 more to go. Already. Matter of fact, I need to start grabbing them parts now and just putting them in the blooper section.
Making like a whole separate file because you're gonna have to go through like all this stuff because it's gonna be like in every single edit.
All right, I'm ready. And we are rolling.
So for me as a kid, sports and everything just active was huge for me. I always was running around outside playing, climbing trees just like every other, young boy. Obsessed with climbing trees, always going in the woods, just journeys and just investigating and searching out everything. But sports, definitely basketball, football, but primarily football. I started playing, I think, Pop Warner maybe at 9, 8. And my dad's short, my mom's short, so obviously I'm short. It's just in my genetics. But I was like extremely short, and plus I hit puberty late. I wouldn't know that whenever I was like 9, but eventually that's what happened. So I was always the shortest kid in every grade. I was the smallest person on the football team every single year. But that led me to be extremely competitive. Because I think that subconsciously as a kid, I knew that I was so short, and that kind of made me feel like less than, I had a short man complex. So that led me to just be an overachiever in anything, like when it comes to like just physical fitness. When it comes to sports, I would just go out there and snap. And I wasn't the fastest kid. I was quick, but I have flat feet, so I was always kind of like in the middle range when it comes to speed. So it's not like I was one of them short, super fast kids that could just outshine everybody with his speed. I had to outshine people with my aggression. So I just had the heart the size of Texas, man. And I think just also too, my dad not being there, like that subconscious like pain of his absence, or kind of feeling like rejected. That like even doubled my feeling of like that like doubled the feeling of my worthlessness and feeling less than, and on top of that, being short and small. So that just made me snap with sports. That became like my life. That was my outlet. So immediately, I remember like my first year playing football, it was natural for me to go out there and just rock somebody, full speed, head first, running as fast as I can, and trying to take that boy's head off. So that was a place for me to just vent and deal with just, life. And not that I was like stressed out, we weren't immersed in poverty. We were like lower middle class, especially before my mother remarried. But we never like were extremely poor. I wasn't beat as a child or endured some type of serious trauma, but, just with my father not being there. But still, even that, it's not like I consciously thought of these things and how like it affected me as a kid. Nah, it was just life. I was having fun, and I fell in love with football. But not only did I start just naturally gifted, but also too, I've always been very outgoing and energetic and a communicator. So I naturally kind of became like the captain of the team, like my very first year. I remember in practice I was always outspoken, encouraging everybody and challenging everybody to do better and getting everybody hyped. So that began in practice, and that led to the games, and that became like my new high. Not my new high, but that came like football became my first love, and that was like a high for me. Like going out on game day, everybody hype, and it's getting everybody that's lit, and just, you know, screaming and, you know, just declaring war on the opponents and just mugging the, you know, the other team, and just going out there for battle every weekend. Man, I love football. It became my life. And I played linebacker, I played safety, I played corner. You know, so I was a captain of the team, and I was captain of the defense. But remember, man, I'm the smallest kid on every team. So literally every weekend when we had a weigh-in, you have to make weight. And you have to, like, weigh over a certain amount, and you have to weigh under a certain amount to be on this team that I'm on. So literally because of my age and because of my weight, how small I was, my coaches used to force me to, like, especially my defensive coach, I used to have to drink like gallons of water, like a gallon of water before a weigh-in, and I have to eat a whole bunch of food. And I used to intentionally put rocks in my shoes, rocks in my pocket. I used to stand on the scale with like a full gallon of water in my hand just so I could make weight. I remember there was like a couple games that I couldn't play because I didn't make weight because I was so small, so that's how small I was. And it was a reverse for most kids. They would have to throw up and run a whole bunch before, weigh-in just so they can make weight and play, because they were too overweight. But for me, I was too small. But I was a head buster, man. I used to go out there and just run as fast as I can with good form and throw my body as hard as I could at the running back or wherever I had the ball, quarterback, wide receiver, whatever. So football was my life, and especially just being a leader. And I experienced that young. That was just God's call upon my life naturally as a leader, and I thrived in it, and I fell in love with it. So football throughout all my childhood and adolescence, kept me out of the streets. It kept me out of trouble. That was my life. That was my purpose. So when my mother remarried, to this guy, the ex-military vet, he loved sports too, so he was very supportive. He used to be at my practices, be at my games. But he was disciplined too. He taught me a lot of discipline because I didn't have no discipline just because my mom was always working. She was, taking care of, 2 kids by herself with little to no help besides like babysitting from her mother, which was my grandmother. So she was never around. That's why I always call like my grandmother like my mom, because she pretty much raised me, from when we came over here from Houston. Even if we weren't living with her, like in the home, like when I get out of school, I'm going straight to my grandma's. My mom would come pick us up late at night. So I never see my mom besides like night. And I just remember even like dinner, like we never sat down and ate dinner. Like everything was always in the fridge. Mom would cook the night before and leave everything in the fridge. So me and my sister, we pretty much fended for ourselves, took care of ourselves throughout the majority of our childhood, until she married this guy. But that only lasted for 2 years. They had a good marriage. I thought they was fine. He's always goofy. We've always had fun. And he had some money too. He had a boat, so he used to take us out on the boat, take us fishing. So that became like hobbies for me that I enjoyed doing. But he was real strict too. He was real disciplined. And at times, I didn't enjoy that. Obviously, I missed a couple games just because of lack of like doing chores at the house or whatever. But after 2 years, I think he was very controlling, and I forget how my mother explained it, but not only was he controlling and kind of like obsessive, but he was real selfish and wasn't really caring about how anyone else, or mainly how she felt or whatever. So they ended up getting a divorce after 2 years. And I remember like I didn't know any of this was going on, but I just remember that he used to always beef with my sister. And I'm sure my sister was kind of hard to deal with just because, all right. So yeah, I mean, obviously anytime I say obviously now, bro, I'm like, dang, there it goes again. Why would you do that?
I gotta stop doing
Don't ever do that, man. We're just gonna edit those out. So any teenager, any teenage girl, I'm sure, is obviously, Alright, seriously.
I'm sorry, dog. I ain't mean to ruin you like this.
No, you're good. Any teenage girl, I'm sure, is hard to parent and deal with, especially being like a stepfather and just entering her life at that age. So, like, as a kid, I think I remember just kind of interpreting that way, because I remember, like, they used to always beef, And he used to always like set up these rules in the house of like, you know, sitting down and eating dinner together, and like all that stuff was new for us, you know, but like I didn't mind it. I liked being around him, and I thought it was kind of cool that we was being like a family, because I never really experienced that. But I remember like she hated that just because she wanted to be in her room talking to her friends on the phone or on the computer or whatever it was that she was doing. And not just that, but like going places and doing things. I remember that he would get in like heated arguments with her about her not being a part of the family and her being selfish and only thinking about herself. But I remember him like snapping though. And I remember like being like, as a kid, I'm like, dang, like, because I liked him a lot, and, you know, and I look up to him. But I remember like sometimes while he'd be snapping, I'm like, dang, I wonder if I should be like sticking up for my sister right now, because he would be like going in, not like in the unhealthy like extreme type of way, but he used to be like snapping. So I just kind of always interpreted that she was like in the wrong. That's how I was interpreting it. Like she was just being selfish and just being like a teenage girl, because I was younger than her. I didn't mind still being a part of the family. I wanted to. Like that was new for me. It was cool. But I remember my mom started being vocal about him yelling at her, and she started like defending my sister like on every corner, and she started going in on him. And that's when I started realizing like there was something going on, and that started happening all the time. And that became real consistent. But I remember like the tipping point was always my sister. So as a kid, I only thought it was about her. So I think I remember one day there was a huge explosion in the house. My sister's crying, my mom's crying. Her husband at the time, he was snapping. So I'm young, so I know that my mom was yelling, my sister was yelling, and they was getting in the car and they were leaving, and they were taking me. So as a young boy, I remember I didn't know what was going on, but now I'm snapping on her husband because they're crying. I'm crying, I'm yelling at him. I don't even know why I'm yelling at him. I'm just trying to stick up for them because I see how serious it is. And I remember my mom just took me and we left, you know, so there we go again, you know, my mom taking us and we leaving. And I forget where we went. I think we went to my grandmother's, you know, sure. And they got divorced. You know what? Nah, I don't think they got divorced then. I think, obviously, yeah. I don't think they got divorced. I think that was just I think they split up for a little bit. I think they worked through it. Yeah, because then they built a house together. And then we moved into that house down there in South Venice. But that didn't last long. I remember we barely even lived in that house. I think we maybe lived there for not even a year, I think. I could be wrong. Maybe a year and a half, I'm not sure. But that neighborhood we moved in South Venice, it's just all the back streets in South Venice. Like, to me, those are the most pivotal childhood memories for me, because that's when I was like coming of age. I think I was like 12, you know? So that's when like the innocent, you know, just playing football and climbing trees like was behind me. And now it was like the mischievous, you know, having fun, like, you know, just destroying cars with oranges and just throwing rocks at cars, throwing rocks at windows, busting out windows, getting into fights in the neighborhood. That's when all that started going down. So I got real big into skateboarding for a while, just experimenting different things. And I think as a kid too, I'm sure anybody could tell you who grew up with me in school, I went through phases of like trying to find my identity as a kid, real young, exposed to hip hop. I think my first album actually might have been a Juvenile album. I think it was, man. I think I remember I convinced my mom to buy it for me at Target. And it was, you know, the one with, you know, it's cursing all in it, parental advisory. And I don't think she was even aware of that or even knew what that meant. But she bought it for me, and I remember listening to it. I'm like, yeah, she only knew, you know, all this cursing on it. But still, I was too young to understand. Because this is before, like, 12. I was probably, like, maybe 9. That's whenever I got, like, really exposed to hip-hop. Because I think the first hip-hop song I remember was that Tupac song. What is it? Welcome to California, or California Love?
For Tupac?
Yeah, with Dre and they're in the Mad Max
I think Welcome
outfit.
to California came out first.
But remember the video when they're all the Mad Max outfits?
Yeah,
California. No, how's that Welcome to California go?
California. No, that's
Yeah.
California Love.
California Love. That's with Dr. Dre in it. Yeah. So I think that was probably one of the first hip hop songs I heard, because that was, you know, all over the radio. And I remember I just got obsessed with hip hop music, and that's when I started rapping. just freestyling before I even knew what freestyling meant in the car with my mom and my sister over like Tupac, song. And then I got that Juvenile album. And then I think, I remember liking the Juvie album a lot, but really when like I found like my favorite artist and like I found like, I would say I became like a fan of like a major artist was DMX. And I think It's Dark and Hell is Hot was like probably one of the most monumental and iconic albums from my childhood, because I started watching DMX like on TV and listening to all his music, and he was short and he was aggressive and he was like in your face, like a man's man. And like, that was like me all day. I'm a short kid, with a short man complex. And that was me. I was aggressive on the field. I had to make up for my lack of height with aggression. But like, X did it in such a way that like he made me proud to be short. So yeah, DMX, he like made me proud to be short. And I think that his prayers on his album, like God would use that to minister to me, to even though I was beginning to be attracted to like street life and culture, God would just use X to minister to me the gospel. And I think those are just little things God would do to like sow into my heart and my mind, that I would realize and know not only like the existence of God, but his call upon my life. And even though like despite whatever I was getting interested in, whether it be the streets and the route in which I began to take, like God's still real at the end of the day, and I still need to have a relationship with him. But also too, like X was a poet, and I really started getting interested in poetry at a young age in juvenile programs, but that was years later. So yeah, man, I started getting, I became a huge hip hop fan, at a young age. And that was like, I think probably the first taste of street glory and street culture that I was introduced to. But also too, man, one of my best friends when I was a kid, he played football with me on the same team. His older brother was a dope boy. Did I talk about this in any of the interviews? I need to always probably just respit if I don't even remember. Yeah.
Who you about to mention?
My dog's older brother, who used to come out there with all chains and bet money on the games and stuff.
No.
Yeah. Alright. Because I've been doing these interviews like on IG and stuff. I'm forgetting if it's for this. Alright, so yeah, one of my best friends on the football team, his older brother was a couple years older than us. And I remember he used to come out to our football games. And I knew he was a dope boy. Like, I didn't put two and two together. Like, I didn't know like he was selling like soft and hard, and I didn't know all the details. I just know that he sold drugs. And he had all slugs in his mouth, and he used to come out to the football field with all these chains on and his jewelry. And I remember like the clout that he had and the rank that he had in the street, because anywhere he went, like he moved crowds, and people like followed behind him and looked up to him, and like what he said was law. So I remember looking up to him, as like a role model and as like a big brother. And, because his younger brother was my dog, we used to talk, and he used to always, talk to me like, bro, he would never little boy me. He was always real, like, he was just real and showed me love. And he used to come out there and bet on all the football games. So I think seeing him and knowing that he's so dope and seeing like his leadership in the streets was a huge pivotal moment in my life, to where I realized that not only could my leadership be like used on the football field in which I would find purpose and fulfillment, but also in the streets. And even though I didn't take that route yet, I think that was the beginning stage and the thought process for me of my interest of being attracted to the street lifestyle and wanting to sell drugs. So back to the narrative, to where we were living in this house, in South Venice, that my mom and her husband had built. So back there, I started, just getting more mischievous trouble. And that's when their relationship went off the deep end. Same thing, same problem, more arguments, all behind, my sister. But come to find out years later, as I matured, my mother was willing to communicate to me. It was just him being obsessive and controlling, and him just actually being selfish and wanting everything his way and not being thoughtful of, my sister or the family, and just wanting to domineer and dominate everything. And my mother just had enough, and so she divorced him, so then they sold that house, And then my mother, I think this is when we moved into a house of our own for the first time. We just moved like 5 streets down. We moved into like a smaller, it was a 3-bedroom house, but it was like originally 2, and they turned the porch into like a bedroom. So it was small, kind of run down. But it wasn't bad, you know, this middle class neighborhood, lower middle class home. But this is when I really started getting in trouble. But during this time, though, I'm a star on the football field, captain of the team, captain of the defense. We're winning championships back to back every year. Socially in school, you know, I'm getting good grades, A's and B's, but I'm a class clown, always just, you know, being goofy and clowning, you know, with all my dogs, all my friends or people I play football with. You know, we got a big clique. But around this time, around like 12, 13 is whenever I started, you know, like I said, just mischievous, you know, just young jit, trouble, you know, throwing oranges at cars, throwing rocks at cars. We used to wait every 4th of July every year until all the fireworks go on sale, and we would give our dog's dad a whole bunch of money. He used to go get all the fireworks from the fireworks store, and we would just be letting off all these M80s and these black cats and bottle rockets next to all these people's windows. And we used to take them to like retirement homes and like these trailer parks and put them off by the windows, and just to wake up all the old people, because we would want them to call the police. So when they would call the cops, we would purposely wait for the cops to come just so we could run. And that was like our entertainment. We literally did that like every night for like throughout the whole summer, and we did this for like years as kids. And we used to love it, man, just running from the cops and just doing innocent, stupid, you know, just fun. But then I started partying, man. My other dog, Jimbo, his older cousins were from Tampa, and they were a couple years older than us. One of his cousins was like more than just a couple years, and they would come down from Tampa, and man, they would come down with like guns in the trunk, and they're smoking weed everywhere they go, and they always got liquor, they're always drunk. They're literally beating up everybody in our city. Like all the kids older than us, like the kids our age, their older brothers, like they're beating up all these kids. They're getting all these fights at the gas station. One of Jimbo's cousins, he's like knocking out everybody. So they're coming to our city, and they're just like causing mayhem just so they can lay low from Tampa. And we're being exposed to this as like 12, 13-year-olds. And me, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was so cool because I just started smoking weed with them, as well as another friend who I play football with. So I started smoking weed. I'm getting high with them all the time. And especially whenever they take us out to like parties or we're hanging out with them, you know how like older guys are with like young kids. They're like making us get drunk and drinking a whole bunch, and as we smoke, making us hold in the smoke as long as we can and then chase it with a shot. Man, so we just getting messed up and just having fun. But I'm loving it. Like this is, I'm loving life, just because I ain't have no older like dudes around me. I think mainly, and not only because I was having fun getting high and drinking, but I think a big part of it was like I really had no like family, like older brothers, and no like male role models or older men around me. That being around them was just so like super fun. They were just so cool to me, and man, we was just hanging out. So around this time, I think I was like in 8th grade. So that's when I started drinking and smoking. And in that summer from 8th grade to high school is when I started getting off the deep end. And I started realizing I'm smoking weed all the time now, that obviously like weed costs money. And my dad, even though I would see him every summer, I see him for a couple weeks out the summer. I remember going over to Houston. You know, he would spoil us. That's all he was ever good for, man. And I would say that like in a bad way, but you know, because he wasn't there and present in our lives. Like he would literally work overtime all year just to save up a whole bunch of money. So whenever he would get me and my sister a couple weeks out the summer, he would just spoil us in Houston, take us to Six Flags, Astro World, all these different places, you know, buying us a new game systems, Blockbuster every night, movies, games, taking me to Astros games, playing catch with me. So of course I loved the summers. I loved seeing my dad. I never hated my dad growing up. I never, you know, didn't want to be around him. I wanted to be with him. He even tried moving to Florida at one point, but he couldn't get like a good steady job. I remember him even sleeping out of his van. He used to drive from Houston over here to Florida every summer in his van and pick us up and take us to Houston and then drive us back. But he tried living over here in Florida, but he couldn't find a place, wasn't making enough money, so he was homeless, sleeping in his van. eventually moved back to Houston. But I just remember him always spoiling us and getting us everything we wanted. And of course, as a kid, I loved it, and I just loved really being with him and just spending time with him. I remember going to work with him and just like enjoying watching my dad work. I think that really instilled work ethic in me, even though it wasn't much that I did it. It's only a couple of times. I just remember my dad always being a boss on the job, people listening to him, and he was always talking about like working hard, and seeing the hours he was working, because while he's working overtime, I go to work with him like overnight. So I think that like instilled within me, you know, my work ethic that I have now today. So my dad, I only seen him a couple weeks out the year. Sometimes during my big championships, he would try to make it and he would be there, and that meant the world to me. But I remember my mom used to always kind of like speak bad about him. Not like blatantly and not like really like heinously, but she used to always, you know, say things about, you know, him not being there or not wanting to be, or you know, just different things. So that was always kind of like a thought in my mind about how, like, I guess he did have the opportunity to be here if he wanted to, but he was kind of like choosing not to be. Well, when I was 13, I think it was right after I was 11 in 2001. So right after 9/11, you know, when the war started, not only did a whole bunch of troops start going overseas, but other big companies such as like KBR and Halliburton, they started doing a whole bunch of private contracting work in Iraq and Afghanistan. So my father heard of the job opportunity, and I think in maybe 2002, 2003, he went overseas. So that's when, you know, he started going overseas to work. So I'm only seeing him, you know, same thing, maybe a week or two out the year when he come back from overseas. But he was making a lot of money, and for the first time in his life, he's making not just good money, but great money. So he went from being like bankrupt, poor, not having nothing, not knowing how to manage any of his money, to now making all this money. So I remember him sending money to my mom every month for me and my sister. So this was around the time when I'm getting in trouble. So he would send money, you know, every month I would get some money. It'd be like maybe $150, $200, I think. So I'm just buying weed with it, you know, just buying weed, or, you know, alcohol, whatever, you know, clothes or whatever I want. But then honestly too, at this point in time, whenever I was smoking weed and partying, is when I realized that, okay, I smoke weed and I love smoking weed. I smoke weed all day, every day, but it's expensive. So why smoke all this weed and pay for it when I could sell weed and smoke for free? So that was like my initial thought process. So I started selling weed to smoke for free.
He was already breaking like one of the drug dealer commandments. You came in the game breaking that rule. All right.
So when I realized that, I can just sell weed just so I get high for free, it's when I started like selling weed to people who I was in high school with. But then when I started getting known as the kid in high school, like for people to get their weed, I kind of liked that. You know what I mean? Just like the notoriety that came with it, you know, and everybody hitting Steve up for some weed. And even though like I'm getting weed from my dog who's in high school with me, a couple years older than me, he's the one selling like a lot of weed. I'm just getting weed from him and I'm just reselling it. But really what I'm doing too is just pinching weed out of everybody else's bag that I'm selling to, so I can smoke for free and make money. So really I'm just getting over on a whole bunch of people and just kind of trying their gangster, knowing they're not going to do nothing to me, and just, you know, enjoying the whole process. But also too, that's when other kids, during this time, you know, in school, my grades are obviously having an effect. Rather than being an A and B student like I was, I'm not getting C's. I'm playing freshman football. The freshman coach, he was a tennis coach. He had no business coaching football. So this guy barely knows anything about football. He thinks he does, but he definitely doesn't know anything about our chemistry and all the guys who we grew up together playing football with. So my freshman year playing football, when we first get our pads after spring conditioning, he has me in goon squad, third string. So I'm pissed, you know. So I'm clowning. My dogs are laughing like, bro, just calm down, dog. Like, you know, like the first scrimmage we have, you're gonna be made first string. He just puts you on third string because how small you are. You don't know who, like, your reputation. So I'm like, all right, it's whatever. But also too, like, there is a whole bunch of other kids from high school who started playing football, never played football before. And there was this one kid who started, practice, and he was like doing the most during practice, like trying to get everybody hype, and he was like dying to be the leader. So me, I'm not gonna like compete with this guy because I already know who I am. I'm the leader. I'm the captain of the team. I know everybody rocks with me. So I really didn't even want to like compete with this dude because it's kind of like lame and he doing the most. So I kind of let him do his thing. But I remember one of my dogs like pulling me to the side, and he was like, "Bro, Testa, like, what are you doing, bro? Like, get up there, man." I'm like, "Nah, it's straight, bro. Let him do that." But I think not only is because like I was feeling some type of way because some random new person was up there doing his thing, but also too because my interest was changing. Because during this time, I'm getting high, I'm going to all these parties, I'm getting into fights. I start selling weed. My grades are being affected. Like my passion, like wasn't like football anymore. I think that was like the slow transitioning that was taking place, that was kind of being manifested in that moment. Like that's why bro pulled up on me, and he's like, "Bro, like, what are you doing? Like, how come you ain't up there, like, leading us, bro? Like, you letting him do it?" So I think partially it was just because maybe me not even wanting to compete with this dude. But I think a big part of it was, too, like, my heart was changing. My passion was changing. I was finding my identity somewhere else. So throughout that freshman year, it just continued to intensify. I'm going to high school parties all the time. And I'm cool with everybody. I know a whole bunch of people because of football. So I'm extremely not just social myself and my personality, but all the popular kids, like all the seniors and all the people throwing parties, those are all my dogs because I grew up with all of them playing football, even though they're years older than me. I'm a freshman, my sister's a senior, and my sister wasn't very social at all, but still all like the popular kids in her grade, they all knew me. I was all friends with them from football. So I'm going to all these big parties that she's not even going to. So I'm having fun in high school, going to all these parties, getting drunk, getting in fights here and there, but really just trying to sell drugs and trying to like develop a new like name for myself and find, I guess, a new role of leadership. And it was exciting for me. It was fun, and I was loving it. So I started selling like Adderalls, because I was big in high school. And I met this girl, and her boyfriend was an older Chico, and he was selling a lot of cocaine. So I started selling soft in high school. But it was 10th grade, beginning my 10th grade year, when my grades were real bad. I think I had like all F's. I'm barely going to school. I'm high before every day in school. I'm bringing weed to school, selling weed at school, selling weed in the parking lot, meeting people after school, selling weed. And my grades are taking a toll. I remember the JV coach told me and one of my other dogs, like, "Yo, if you don't have a 2.0, like our first game, like you can't play, you can't dress out." So I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." Because even though like the freshman coach, like he didn't know who I was and my skill, when he seen like how I was playing, I was obviously playing a lot more. But I don't think I was starting, but I was getting a lot of playtime. I was getting more playtime. So that was making me mad too, because like I didn't have my spot on the football field, even when I know that I'm more skilled than most of these guys who was in front of me. But I think it was also too just because that was that puberty hit. Everybody else is getting like big and growing and developing. I'm like 14 as a freshman. I'm like 115. You know what I mean? Like the smallest kid out there, super skinny. But still the hardest side of Texas. So when I'm making tackles, I'm just going low, but I'm still making all my tackles, great vision on the field. But I think just because the height gap, maybe just the lack of coaching from the freshman coach, whatever, that not only made me mad as well, but because my interest in the streets slowly had my decline from sports, being interested, from football to the streets. So the JV coach told me, like, "Man, listen, if your GPA ain't 2.0, you ain't finna dress out." So I'm like, "Yeah, right, whatever, I'm gonna play." You know what I mean? Because I'm getting more playtime at this point.